Chad Dorman, the execution in plain daylight June 15, 2023, started as an ordinary Thursday in Monroe Township, Ohio. By 4:25 p.m., 3 young boys lay dead in their own front yard, executed by the one person who should have protected them above all others. Chad Dorman, age 32, methodically retrieved a .22 caliber rifle from his gun safe and began hunting his own sons inside their family home. 7-year-old Clayton ran for his life through a nearby field. His father chased him down and shot him from behind, then delivered a point-blank shot to the head. 4-year-old Hunter was shot twice while lying in bed. 3-year-old Chase managed to escape temporarily with his 14-year-old stepsister. But Dorman caught him, wrestling the child from his mother's arms before executing him. Laura Dorman, the boy's mother, fought desperately to save her children. She grabbed the rifle at one point. Dorman shot her through the hand. She tried to shield Chase. Dorman bit her and tore him away. When police arrived 4 minutes after the first 911 call, they found Chad sitting calmly on the side stoop, watching his wife perform CPR on bodies that were already beyond saving. The cold precision of this crime haunts investigators. Dorman later admitted he'd been planning this massacre since October 2022, 8 months of living with his children while secretly plotting their deaths. There was no sudden rage, no momentary loss of control. This was premeditated annihilation. At his August 2024 sentencing, prosecutors spared him the death penalty in exchange for a guilty plea. Chad Dorman received 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He will die in prison, but unlike his sons, he'll have decades to reflect on what he destroyed. Anthony Todt, The Apocalypse That Never Came In, late December 2019, the Todt family's holiday plans took a sinister detour. While neighbors in their Celebration, Florida community prepared for New Year's festivities, Anthony Todt was living with corpses. By January 2020, when federal agents investigating healthcare fraud finally entered the Todt home, the stench of decomposition was overwhelming. Inside, they discovered Anthony's wife Megan, 42, and their 3 children, 13-year-old Alexander, 11-year-old Tyler, and 4-year-old Zoe, all dead for weeks. Even the family dog, Breezy, had been killed. The victims were found in beds throughout the house, stabbed in their stomachs, smothered to death, with crucifixes placed in their hands. Anthony Todt wasn't a blue-collar laborer or an uneducated man. He was a physical therapist, educated and articulate. But his Connecticut clinics were hemorrhaging money through fraudulent billing schemes. By 2019, he was drowning in over $100,000 of debt, with federal investigators closing in. His defense? He claimed he was saving his family from the apocalypse. He testified that Megan had killed the children before attempting suicide, and he merely finished what she started. Forensic evidence demolished this narrative. Megan died first. The children had been drugged with Benadryl before being killed. Anthony Todt's apocalypse never materialized. The world kept spinning, kids kept going to school, and Celebration, Florida remained perfectly intact. The only world that ended was the one he destroyed himself. In April 2022, a jury convicted him on 4 counts of first-degree murder. He received life imprisonment without parole, plus an additional year for animal cruelty. The apocalypse he feared turned out to be one of his own creation. Joshua Powell, murder by fire. Susan Powell's disappearance in December 2009 from West Valley City, Utah, launched one of the most frustrating missing persons investigations in recent memory. Her husband Joshua's story defied belief. He claimed he'd taken their 2 young sons, Charlie 7 and Braden 5, camping in a blizzard after midnight, leaving Susan home alone. When he returned, she was simply gone. Law enforcement never believed him. Blood evidence was found in the home. Susan's family knew the marriage was toxic. marked by Joshua's controlling behavior and mounting financial pressure. His father, Stephen Powell, had an obsessive fixation on Susan, secretly filming her and writing disturbing journal entries. But without a body, prosecutors couldn't charge Joshua with murder. The boys were placed with Susan's parents, with Joshua granted only supervised visitation. On February 5, 2012, a social worker named Elizabeth Griffin Hall brought Charlie and Braden to Joshua's rental house for one such visit. Joshua grabbed the boys, then slammed the door in Hall's face and locked it. Panicked, she called 911, telling dispatchers she heard what sounded like chopping and smelled gasoline. Minutes later, the house exploded. The explosion was heard across the neighborhood. Flames consumed the structure before firefighters could respond effectively. Inside, investigators found horrific evidence. Both boys had been attacked with a hatchet before the blast. Gasoline had been poured throughout the home. Joshua Powell had struck his sons with a hatchet, then ignited the gasoline, ensuring no one would survive. Susan Powell's body has never been recovered. West Valley City Police officially closed their active investigation in May 2013, stating their belief that Joshua murdered Susan and his brother Michael helped conceal her body. Both men are now dead, Joshua by his own hand, Michael by suicide in 2013. Charlie and Braden Powell's graves contain a memorial for their mother, whose remains lie somewhere in the Utah wilderness, never to be found. Xavier Dupont de Ligons, the aristocrat who vanished in April 2011, the affluent French town of Nantes, became the site of a mystery that has captivated and horrified France for over a decade. The Dupont de Ligons family, well-educated, aristocratic, seemingly stable, vanished overnight, or so it appeared. Xavier Dupont de Ligons, a 50-year-old with an aristocratic lineage and refined manners, was drowning in debt by early 2011. His business ventures had collapsed. His self-image as a successful patriarch was evaporating. Rather than face exposure, he made a calculated choice: erase his entire bloodline. Between April 3 and 5, 2011, Xavier methodically murdered his family. His wife, Agnes, 48. Their 4 children, Arthur, 21, Thomas, 18, Anne, 16, and Bonneau, 13. Investigators believe he drugged them with sleeping pills before shooting each with a .22 rifle. Thomas didn't even live at home. Xavier lured him back with a false emergency about his mother, then killed him too. After the murders, Xavier buried the bodies beneath the terrace behind the family home, wrapping each corpse carefully and using quicklime to manage decomposition. He cleaned meticulously, removing blood evidence and staging the house to appear abandoned rather than crime scene. Then he sent letters explaining the family had been recruited into a witness protection program by American authorities. The cover story was detailed, official-sounding, eerily convincing. For weeks, no one suspected mass murder. Then, relatives grew suspicious of the prolonged silence. On April 21, 2011, police discovered the graves beneath the terrace. By then, Xavier Dupont de Ligons had vanished. Hotel surveillance captured him traveling south through France in mid-April. On April 15, cameras showed him walking toward mountainous wilderness near Roquebrune Cap Martin. He was never seen again. Theories abound: suicide in the wilderness, escape to another country, a carefully planned new identity. In 2019, authorities arrested a man in Scotland they believed was Xavier. Not testing proved it wasn't him. 13 years later, one of France's most wanted men remains a ghost. If alive, he'd be 63, possibly living under an assumed name, possibly buried somewhere in the southern French wilderness, or possibly laughing at investigators from another continent. Robert William Fisher, Into the Arizona Wilderness, April 10, 2001, began with an explosion that rocked a quiet Scottsdale, Arizona neighborhood. Firefighters rushed to the Fisher residence at 8:42 a.m., battling a blaze so intense it collapsed the front brick wall. When they finally entered, they found the bodies of Mary Fisher, 38, and her two children, Brittany, 12, and Bobby, 10. This was no accident. The gas line from the furnace had been deliberately cut. The bodies showed evidence of brutal violence. Brittany and Bobby's throats had been slashed. Mary had been shot in the back of the head. The explosion was a cover-up, designed to destroy evidence. Robert William Fisher, the father and husband, was missing. Fisher wasn't a stranger to violence. Friends described disturbing behavior during hunting trips, smearing elk blood on his face, emptying his gun into the air behind unsuspecting families. He had once shot a neighbor's pit bull under questionable circumstances. His marriage was toxic, marked by his controlling behavior and Mary's growing intention to divorce him. For Fisher, a man traumatized by his parents' divorce at age 15, the idea of history repeating itself was intolerable. 10 days after the explosion, investigators found Mary's Toyota 4Runner abandoned near Young, Arizona, deep in the rugged Tonto National Forest. The family dog, Blue, was found alive nearby. But Robert Fisher? Gone. Fisher had been a firefighter, a respiratory therapist, and an outdoorsman with extensive survival skills. He knew the wilderness. He knew how to disappear. Despite massive search efforts, cadaver dogs, and decades of investigation, no trace of him has ever been found. Fisher was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list in June 2002. In November 2021, after nearly 20 years without capture, he was removed from the top 10, not because he was found, but because the extensive publicity had failed to produce results. The arrest warrant remains active. The question that haunts investigators: did Robert Fisher die in that unforgiving wilderness, or did he successfully start a new life somewhere, forever free from justice? William Bradford Bishop Jr., the diplomat who disappeared on March 1st, 1976. William Bradford Bishop Jr., a U.S. State Department employee, a trained diplomat, fluent in multiple languages, learned he wouldn't receive an expected promotion. For a man who considered himself intellectually superior to his colleagues, this wasn't just disappointing. It was unacceptable. That same day, Bishop made revealing purchases: a gas can, a shovel, a pitchfork, and a ball-peen hammer. That night, inside the family's Bethesda, Maryland home, he systematically murdered 5 people using that hammer: his wife Annette, his mother Lobelia, and his 3 sons, William III, 14, Brenton, 10, and Jeffrey, 5s. Bishop didn't panic. He loaded all 5 bodies into his station wagon and drove over 300 miles south to a remote wooded area near Columbia, North Carolina. There, he dug a shallow pit, placed the bodies inside, poured gasoline over them, and set them ablaze. Forest rangers noticed smoke, but only discovered the burned remains days later. The bodies were found before the house. Initially, authorities didn't know who the victims were or who was responsible. Only after a neighbor in Bethesda grew concerned about the abandoned home did police connect the burned remains in North Carolina to the Bishop family. By then, William Bradford Bishop Jr. had vanished. His station wagon was eventually discovered abandoned in Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains, another deliberate misdirection. Bishop understood borders, systems, and how authority works. With his language skills and overseas experience, he could plausibly disappear anywhere in the world. Reported sightings came from Italy, Switzerland, Sweden, and throughout Europe. Every lead evaporated. In 2018, the FBI removed Bishop from its 10 most wanted list, he would be in his late 80s if still alive. The warrant remains active, but most investigators believe if Bishop is alive, he successfully vanished into a new identity decades ago. His daughter, Kathy Gilchrist, discovered through DNA testing in 2017 that Bishop was her biological father. She'd been adopted and never knew her violent origins. 5 lives destroyed because one man couldn't tolerate professional failure. Neil Entwistle, the British husband's American crime, January 20th, 2006, appeared to be a quiet day in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Inside a townhouse, 27-year-old Rachel Entwistle and her 9-month-old daughter, Lillian Rose, lay dead in the master bedroom, covered by blankets. They'd been shot. But their bodies wouldn't be discovered for 2 days, because the man who should have reported them missing was already across the Atlantic Ocean. Neil Entwistle, a British citizen, had moved with Rachel from England to Massachusetts so she could be near her family. On the surface, they seemed like a young couple adjusting to parenthood. Underneath, Neil was unemployed, drowning in debt, with business ventures that existed more in fantasy than reality. Rachel's parents were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Divorce was being discussed. On January 20, Neil shot Rachel and baby Lillian while they lay together in bed. He used a .22 caliber revolver from Rachel's father's gun collection. After killing them, he carefully arranged bedding over their bodies, obscuring them from casual view. Then he left the house, drove to Boston's Logan Airport, and boarded a flight to London using his British passport. A first welfare check on January 22 failed to locate the bodies. Officers didn't search thoroughly. Only on a second check were Rachel and Lillian discovered. By then, Neil Entwistle was 3,000 miles away, back in England, maintaining his innocence and claiming he'd returned home to find his family dead. His story collapsed under investigation. Forensic evidence placed him at the scene. Internet searches on his computer showed he'd looked up information about ways to kill before the murders. Gun residue was found on his clothing. Most damning, he'd purchased a one-way ticket to London the morning after the killings and fled the country before anyone even knew his family was dead. The UK extradited him back to Massachusetts in February 2006. In June 2008, after a highly publicized trial, Neil Entwistle was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He still maintains his innocence from behind prison walls, but the evidence speaks louder than his denials. John List, 18 years of ordinary life, November 9, 1971, was a Tuesday in Westfield, New Jersey. Inside the Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue, John Emil List began his day with a gun and a plan. By nightfall, 5 members of his family would be dead, arranged on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom, like exhibits in a macabre museum. List was a devout Lutheran, a Sunday school teacher, an accountant who valued order and control. But by 1971, his carefully constructed life was crumbling. He'd lost his job, but couldn't bear to tell his family, so he continued the charade, dressing each morning, leaving the house at the usual time, spending days at the train station reading newspapers. His wife, Helen, was an alcoholic suffering from untreated syphilis. His children were, in his view, straying from religious teachings. On November 9th, List methodically executed his family. He shot his wife, Helen, in the kitchen. He shot his 84-year-old mother, Alma, in her attic apartment. As his children came home from school that afternoon, he shot 16-year-old Patricia and 13-year-old Frederick. He even attended his eldest son's soccer game before bringing 15-year-old John Jr. home and killing him too. Then, List staged an elaborate cover-up. He arranged the bodies ceremoniously in the ballroom, wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining he'd saved their souls from corruption, removed his own image from all family photos, turned the thermostat down to preserve the bodies, set a radio to a religious station, and walked out. For nearly a month, no one checked. The lights stayed on continuously. Eventually, on December 7th, concerned neighbors called police. Officers discovered the horrifying scene: 5 decomposing bodies, religious hymns playing on repeat, a house frozen in time. John List was gone. He'd traveled by train to Denver, assumed the identity Robert Peter Clark, remarried, joined a Lutheran church, and lived an entirely ordinary life. For 17 years, 6 months, and 23 days, he was just another quiet accountant in suburban America. In May 1989, America's Most Wanted aired his case, featuring an age-progressed bust sculpted by forensic artist Frank Bender. On June 1st, 1989, a tip led to List's arrest in Virginia. DNA and fingerprints confirmed his identity. At trial in 1990, List was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He died in prison in 2008, having spent the last 19 years of his life behind bars. His victims never got those years. Jeffrey MacDonald, the most controversial case, February 17, 1970, in the early morning hours at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, military police responded to a frantic call. Inside a home on the Army base, Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, a Green Beret physician, told a shocking story. Intruders had broken in, 3 men and a woman, chanting things like "acid is groovy" and "kill the pigs." They'd attacked him and murdered his family. His pregnant wife, Colette, 26, was dead. His daughters, Kimberly, 5, and Kristen, 2, were dead. MacDonald himself had been injured but survived. The scene appeared chaotic, violent, disturbing. The story landed perfectly in the cultural zeitgeist. The Manson murders were fresh in public memory, and the idea of drug-crazed hippies invading a military home seemed plausible. But forensic investigators saw problems immediately. The crime scene looked staged. Blood patterns didn't match MacDonald's story. Fibers from his pajama top were found beneath Colette's body, suggesting it was torn during the murders themselves, not during a supposed struggle with intruders. The word "pig" was written in blood on the headboard, too neat, too deliberate, like someone trying to mimic Manson's crimes. MacDonald's injuries were superficial compared to the brutal violence inflicted on his wife and children. Their throats had been cut, Colette had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The children had been stabbed multiple times. How had MacDonald, a trained Green Beret, suffered only minor wounds while his family was massacred? In 1979, after years of investigation and legal battles, Jeffrey MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. But here's where this case differs from every other on this list. Jeffrey MacDonald has never stopped claiming innocence. Books have been written arguing both sides. Documentaries have examined every angle. His supporters point to alleged DNA evidence, potential intruders, investigative tunnel vision. Critics point to overwhelming forensic evidence, staged crime scenes, and a narcissistic personality that couldn't admit failure. MacDonald remains in federal prison, still appealing, still proclaiming innocence. Unlike the others on this list, who either confessed, were caught fleeing, or left undeniable evidence, MacDonald's case continues to generate fierce debate. Did an Army doctor murder his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters? Or did the justice system destroy an innocent man? The answer depends on what you choose to believe.